So basically, I'm going to go through some of the insider tricks to customer care, of how we've approached it and how we are approaching it and how we're going to approach it, and a bunch of, like mentioned, a few life lessons. But first of all, there you go. This is kind of the game plan for today. I'm going to go over a little bit of background, me, Playlab, then some of our social casino team structure, data basics, CRM, segments, retargeting, all the different types that we're doing, why we're doing them, what works, what really doesn't work. It's going to be very practical, this talk, because I want it to give as much value to all of you participants and everybody else that watches this video, so you get some practical lessons as part of it as well. So it's not all going to be theory, because everybody knows a lot of the high-level stuff, but this is the nitty-gritty of the experiences that we've had so far, what works, what doesn't work. And then I'm going to finish off with creating a cash cow, making money. That's what a lot of people like to do, we as well. So I'm going to go in a little bit into that, then predicting the future, and then a Q&A. So stick around for the Q&A, because I've got gifts to give away as well. So that's exciting. Who is this guy standing on stage? I put this very beautiful Facebook picture just to say, like, I'm really awesome, and I know a lot of people in the games industry. The guy next to me is Tommy Palm, the founder of Candy Crush, and next to him is one of the VPs of ARM, who just got acquired for $3.5 billion, and blah, 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 blah. Basically, just to show off, I'm from Denmark, 28 years old, got 4 cats, funded Playlab 4 years ago, grew it from 2 people, basically sitting in a kitchen with a maid, to 100 people now in 2 different locations, and spent $3.5 million on UA initially on just one of our titles for it. So that's kind of my background in gaming. Playlab itself is, as mentioned, was started 4 years ago. We're 100 people now in 2 locations. Acquired the studio in Philippines 2 years ago. The longest standing studio in Philippines. They're basically 12 years old, did a ton of outsourcing for EA, Big Fish, whatnot, a lot of the big guys. But when we acquired it, we kind of cut off the whole work for hire part and focused on our own products, because we were, at that point 2 years ago, very successful with our Juice Cubes title, which is the graphic on the left, which we're most famous for, and we also launched that together with Rovio, the guys behind Angry Birds. For a 2-year contract. So last year we then raised $5 million, our first round. Everything was self-funded up until 100 guys, basically. Me and my partner put everything into the company and decided there was no reason to raise outside funding until we came to, basically we got approached by one of the big 4 VC firms, and we realized we never really considered taking in funding, and then that started sparking thoughts and ideas on how can we actually allocate more capital in this space in a more effective way than what we were doing at the moment. And the kind of end conclusion of that is what we raised $5 million from Monks Hill Ventures, which is a VC firm based out of Singapore and Indonesia, but I'm not going to talk more about that. That's not important for this talk anyways. And we're a mobile game developer and publisher, and got like 17 different nationalities in our office in Bangkok, because that's how we are get talent into Southeast Asia. It's not really a huge scene for game development. So what we've done is we attract people from all over the world, bring them in for a 2-week vacation in Bangkok, and say, do you like the place? Do you like the vibe? Do you like the beaches? Do you like the clubs and everything? And do you like our office? And do you want to be in the games industry? And most people say yes at the end of those 2 weeks, and then they relocate either with their family, or most of them are single guys, obviously. But yeah, and then they come in and work with us from that point. So today's topic is, last year we transitioned into the social casino space, basically doing slots. And we decided, because of that, based on market trends, very interesting statistics, the top grossing charts were basically all reflecting the same thing, that a bigger and bigger percentage of the top grossing companies out there were doing slots, were doing casino and things like that. And that was kind of the rationale and why we wanted to move into that space. So we did that, and we started moving into it, and then as of about a month ago, we dedicated our whole Filipino operations, which is a team of 45 people, in that casino genre, vertical, whatever we want to call it. So it's a $1 billion market. Everybody who's in the casino industry knows it's massive. It's very stable, dominated by some top heavy guys. They know exactly what they're doing, and we're kind of the new kids on the block, coming with more from a mobile first perspective instead of coming from the casino background and moving into social casino. So this is our take on it, and at least we feel we have a good edge on some of the other companies out there. And I'm going to go a little bit in details into how we structured our team internally on it. So we've set up a content team. We've got a feature team, basically focusing. Our feature team is building all the features of the game, and then we have a live ops team, which is kind of our what's needed going forward, in my opinion, to create multi-million-dollar titles and successful titles that can scale. Because basically all the work that starts after you have launched your title. The work before is part of it, but the real hard work starts after you've launched it. It's the tweaking, and it's the CRM, and it's things that I'll dig more into. And then, of course, we have some leads. We've got QA, admin, everything else, so that's part of it. Basics in order to do this customer relationship management platform, live operations, call it what you want, is data. It all boils down to gathering all the right data from your users, because with no data, you're fighting in the blind. That's at least my theory on it. We don't know where it's wrong, we don't know what's wrong, we don't know where things are going wrong, or where they're going right for that matter. And then that all boils down to it. So these are kind of my rough high level ingredient list that you need. Event tracking solution, or ETL system, something that basically you get a raw data feed from your game that collects all of the data. Tons of solutions out there. Just go to the conference, Casual Connect, you'll meet probably 10 or 20 companies that are specialized in also helping you with analytics, ad monetization, all these things. So very simple to get that. You need a data analyst, you need a developer to actually develop the CRM system you want. I'm trying to simplify this because there's a ton of solutions, generic stuff out there, and it's not my approach to do that. I want to build our own solution because I think that makes it much more customizable, and it's faster to iterate on stuff as you realize you get feedback and you get information about how to work with the data. Lots of coffee as well, obviously, to keep awake, because a lot of people get confused when they look at a lot of data and they analyze it wrong. So that brings me to the next point, which is basically, for the ones that don't know, this is the curve of Dunning-Kruger. He won the Nobel Prize in year 2000. Very famous psychologist. It's basically, you think your confidence level is really high in areas that you don't know anything about. And then it decreases from there as you realize you get smarter and smarter and smarter. You realize that maybe I'm not really as smart as I do. So this reflects a lot on people entering a new market, and that's where I'm advocating, at least because we're the new kids on the block, and being aware of some of these psychological effects that happen, is that we might have a lot of confidence initially because we think we don't know enough about it. But also after a while, you then realize that the more you get into it, and then that's when you actually become an expert, is at the end of that curve, and that's kind of your confidence level then adjusts to that. So self-awareness is key as you're doing new things, things you didn't know about before. To jump straight into it, so basically it's just, we're looking at this as more from a user-centric point of view, tracking about the specifics users. And this is kind of on a higher level. It's because we've seen the market, everybody knows CPIs are increasing, and in that sense, because that's market effects. You can't control that, but you can control how much how much revenue you generate on your users after they come in. And that's why you have to look at it much more granular level, and that is on a user-specific level, knowing exactly who is this user, when did they install, what version are they on, how much time have they spent in your app, how in the slots game is more how much have they been betting, what's their bet sizes, and all these things. And that's what you need to granular down to a specific user, because then I can treat this user in a different way compared to all the other types of users there are. And you need it doesn't have to be much more advanced than this. It's basically just a table of information about every single user you have in the game, and you update that data on the fly as you get your event stream from your game. Some of those values can be their level, so you get this snapshot of where they are, what kind of attribution source they came from. So when you're doing user acquisition, we're using AppsFlyer. There's tons of different tools for attribution. But you know where they're coming from, and that's really valuable as you try to bring them back into your game if they get churned at some point in their life cycle for that specific user, which I'm going to dig a little bit further into as the later part of my presentation. But also this just gives an overview of what device it is. It's basic information that you can collect very simply from any of your mobile games. Purchases, of course, these need to be verified. Got a US dollar value because there's some it's simple stuff in a sense if you break it down. And then you have this list of all your information about your users. And you have this event stream of what they've done within your app. So this is how we visualize it. There's tons of different ways to do it. So on the left side, it's basically this specific user, their coin balance when they're playing the slots, how much coins are they winning. So we try to get a better understanding of what the behavior is of our users. And we do that by trying to map it out and visualize it in a way that is much easier to understand than just looking at an Excel sheet. And here you can see all different, it's a little bit hard to see, but the dots all have different meanings, different things like level up, open the coin store that they purchase, and all of this starts painting a picture of what's the behavior of this user. And we can see, in this specific case, every gray line that kind of tucks in is every session. We've got its timing for that specific session of the user. And we can see at the end of this life cycle of the user, they ran out of coins. They purchased once early on, which is a big jump early on. And then we can see that they haven't really been that active. They've been coming in, some red and yellow dots at the end of that chart. That shows basically they come in, they collect some bonuses, but they're not really playing. They're not engaging with the game. So it's a great opportunity for us to try to get them back into the game, get them engaged again, start playing the actual game instead of just coming in and collecting bonuses and whatnot. So that's the kind of granularity of information that we also collect on every single user that's playing our games. So now we have all this data in our CRM. What do we do with it? Obviously, we want to use this information in a smart and intelligent way in order to maximize our value from the users that are there. So one of those takes on it is, I think Cartman explains it very well. Start up, cash in, sell out, bro down, build simplest basics business model 101, make a lot of money with whatever you have. And that brings me to how do we build a cash machine from all of this data? Because you can do that, and this is my take on it, by going so granular in every single user. I know exactly that you sitting there is worth $10 to me every single day you're active. You're worth $2 to me, and you're worth half a cent maybe. And then I can start classifying this information, and I then have created segments, which I'll jump into the next slide, that classifies each of these users. So users that are worth a lot to me, I'm also willing to pay a lot to advertising networks for bringing these users back. If some user spends $10 every single day that they're active, and they've been inactive for 2 days, I know they might be able to churn. I know they're probably not coming back, so I can say, I want to emphasize on bringing this specific user back, and I'm willing to pay upwards of $9, $10, even just $10 to bring them back, because I know the intrinsic value of this user and getting them back into our game. So that's where the model kind of starts working. Instead of just looking at average revenue per daily active user, you look at it on a specific user, and I know the average revenue from this user is worth this much, and that's how I can quantify the value of these users as well. Great thing of doing this as well is, yeah, you can bring them all back via different ad networks. And once you have a big enough, for example, of paying users, you've got 10,000 paying users, you can start retargeting those 10,000 users on every single day as they start to churn or give indications that they might be leaving the game, and bring them back into the game. So instead of just saying, we'll just keep pulling new users into the game, we're extending the life cycle for those users. And we do that by giving coins, giving offers, whatever it is that might indicate that this user is dropping off. That's what where you need some kind of manual process to analyze the specific behavior of that user and say, how do we get back to them the best possible way? In our own CRM system, we basically, right now, we're just exporting it to these segments of users. Let's say users that are spending more than this. In this case, it's have more than one transactions. And then we throw them into Facebook. And what we're building as well is basically very simple via the API. Take that information from our users, IDFA, Google Analytics ID, name, whatnot, whatever we can, we fire it in there. And then Facebook helps us identify where those users are, or a way to reach them in a custom audience. And then we can basically set up a campaign for these specific users to come back into our game. Building this out with a ton of other networks, AppLovin being one of them because they're very big in social casino, and amongst others. But again, this correlates down to your data of where the users come from, because if they came from AppLovin, it's probably likely that you can bring them in via AppLovin. Again, if they came from Facebook, they're probably still going to be on Facebook, so you can bring them back that way. And then instead of paying for it, there's a couple of steps you should do, in my opinion, before that. It's basically on Facebook, all our paying users, we've got a person, our Katie. She adds all our paying users, kind of take care of them. Does a little bit of VIP support. We've got multiple accounts that where we have a person on the other end that kind of says, hey, how are things going to our paying users? Are you okay? Anything's wrong? Whenever they start fitting into a segment where we kind of get a red lamp that says, we need to do something, otherwise we might lose this very important person. And of course, on your Facebook page and social media, you do whatever you can, but that's very generic and not so specific as I like to be. Localization is, we've done a number of different split tests. We test a lot of different things. This is specifically a test that we did for push notifications to bring users back, because that's a free way to try and re-engage users that might have dropped off, or to give them just a good notification and say, here's 50,000 coins, come back and spin the wheels today, and whatever you want to do, basically. But these were some of our initial test results from localizing this message to in pure language-wise. So we did it in Spanish, French, German, Russian, Thai, Indonesian, and a few different languages. But the general consensus of that is it's obviously good, doubles the engagement rate from just sending an English standard message to your users. So practical tip is do the localization of it once you get a certain scale of it, because people, VIPs that are from Spain, are more likely to interact with your push notifications if they get a message in Spanish. Makes sense. But this is some of the data that we did to kind of trigger, to validate that assumption that we had. Another thing we did was personalization of it, because now we have a database. We know who our users are. We know their name if they log into Facebook. We know their name, we know their email, so we can also send them an email, which is basically close to free compared to re-engagement, paid re-engagement. And then this is a very interesting test that we did. You can see the 7.2% conversion rate and the 12.5. It was a very small test we did, but basically, as part of that push notification, we reached out to them. We used their name in that message. So it's like, hey, John, hey, Tom, how are you doing today? Come on back into the game, for whatever reason. So yeah, use names if you have possibility of personalizing these push notifications to your users. It's very valuable. It seems to really double the engagement rates that we saw from this test. So it's a practical tip. Version 2, what's happening in the future with our CRM system? Obviously, everything is changing. The whole mobile market is adapting very quickly, and we kind of need to be the cool kids on the block in order to have a competitive advantage over our competitors. And this is what we're digging into, is basically building these logistic regression modeling, where we take users and all that information that we have and say, if they did this on day 1, what's the likelihood that they're going to do this on day 3 or day 7 or something? What's the retention rate, predicted retention rate from this model? So that's what we're dabbling a little bit with, because then it means that when we're acquiring users at scale, then we can classify them within a 24-hour period based on their behavior, on what kind of quality users we're going to see on day 3, day 7, day 10, day 30, day 90, and then we can start quantifying if these are good resources of user acquisition, good ad networks to work with, or not. So that's what we're. I also believe is going to be much more prominent for a lot of the more standalone softwares out there that are looking into doing similar stuff. This is also what we're looking at, is heat maps and correlational data. It's just trying to visualize the data in a way that it makes sense. This doesn't make a lot of sense, so don't look at that. But it's an idea that where we see if users do this, like there's a 5x, for example, we did a very clear correlation between users who logged into Facebook. They're 5 times as more likely to engage for the long term. They're much more valuable in terms of spending, and 100 other reasons is it makes sense to get your users to log into Facebook. You can retarget them, you get a lot more information. But visualizing these assumptions that we have around it with data is really interesting, and figuring out what are the high value actions that you can drive your users to do to maximize your revenue over time. So maybe not sending push notifications just to get them back into the game, but to get them back and logging into Facebook for a certain segment of users that haven't logged into Facebook for whatever reason, or trying to incentivize them to do the things that you know are high value actions in your game. Here, and this is kind of our next step that we're working on. This is a test that's very, very early beta, but it's basically all the campaigns of where we're doing user acquisition. The quality of those campaigns are we then trying to visualize and return on advertising spend, because we know exactly these 100 users, 1,000 users came from this specific source. We know exactly their value, and we know their predicted value. So we can start doing some really interesting stuff and really fast turn around or turn on or turn off specific campaigns as we see they perform via our own reporting tool here that incorporates the whole CRM. So we can see, are we above our benchmarks? Have we made 50% ROI on our advertising spend for this campaign within 30 days, or what's kind of the metrics that we can see, and then we can gauge, are we going to continue spending advertising dollars on these and these and these sources or not? So that's key, especially when you want to scale to tens of millions of users, that you have your data basics kind of laid out. And then last thing, which is kind of it was actually our producer who taught me this. Kaizen, it's a Japanese saying. Basically, it's a philosophy of continual improvement. So whatever it is you do, these are some of the beta stuff that we do. Continue to improve it. As you learn, you get smarter, and then you adapt to whatever that new reality that you live in. So continuing to improve what you have instead of sticking at status quo and just, oh, we've used this software for 10 years. That's not a verification that it might work going forward. So always continue to improve on whatever processes and ideas. And I think 5 years from now, everything I've just talked about is probably useless, and everybody is doing it. But for now, I think it's relevant information for a lot of game developers, and not only for the casino space, but in Match 3 and everywhere else, just to maximize your lifetime value of users. Then I have a Q&A. And for the first one that asks a question, I've got a neck pillow or a coffee mug with our brand on. So.
We have one here, actually.
Oh, everybody's asking.
I have a question. You didn't speak much about the product and using brands within your product. Have you looked into that? I noticed that there were some panels earlier talking a lot about that, bringing in licensing brands to enhance user acquisition, but not just for user acquisition, but also for play and usage within the game.
Yeah, it's a very common thing, especially in casino slots, that there's a lot of IP out there. There's a few that are really high level. There's Wizard of Oz, Wheel of Fortune, really good brands for slot machines. I've looked into it. I'm talking to a couple of consultants on bringing in some IP. Right now, I don't think the tier one IPs. That's for us, because we're like in gaming terms, even though we're big 100 guys, semi-big, small company for others. But in the casino space, there's giants in the space, and they're willing to pay a few $1 million for a really good IP. Ellen DeGeneres, for example, and I think it makes sense. Mainly because it lowers your CPI costs, and that's kind of how you can offset, or at least quantify on it. Because if you know you're going to go out and do user acquisition with a specific IP for, let's say, $2-3 million every month, you can very easily quantify you can do a test, probably. That's what I would do before you sign any deal with it. But test how much is it going to increase your conversion rate or your click-through rates on it, and then you can see, okay, what's the difference between my baseline and that, and how big is the audience of that IP, and then you do the whole calculation. It comes out and says, well, you might save $500,000 on that user acquisition spend that you plan to use on the IP, and then say, well, I'm willing to pay $250,000 for this IP, and then it just becomes a very simple calculation in a sense. And then, of course, there's going to be some upside in terms of engagement and loyalty of users as well, hopefully, depending on what IP you choose. But I would look at it purely as a play to lower your acquisition costs. Yeah. Can you? Okay, I'll give this to you after. All right. Yeah. Got gifts for everyone. Go ahead.
I like Juice Cubes. It's a good game.
Yeah?
It's fun. So my question is for your re-engagement campaigns.
Yeah.
When you get previous payers back in the application, have you found they spend at the same levels, and what do their retention curves look like after they come back?
My thoughts on the at least paid re-engagement, I prefer to look at it as a new user, like completely blank shade, that I need to then recoup it. Because whatever happened before with the user, they spent certain things. But from the point of re-engagement, I see it as whatever the cost is, because that's what we need to make an ROI on. Spend-wise, I haven't seen that much change in the behavior. It's equally as important just to kind of nudge the users and say, hey, we're top of mind in a sense when they're playing their other 4 slots machines or whatnot. So the behavior doesn't per se change because if you just see another ad on Facebook and suddenly get into the game. I don't have extensive data on that to support that, but that's my bestest judgment.
So with regard to re-engagement, targeting, and working with networks directly, I found that a lot of the networks are saying that it's too small of spend to even deal with rather than just app installs. What is the way that you're basically getting them to say, like, oh yes, we will run a re-engagement campaign, and what are the data points you're supplying them with to run that re-engagement campaign?
Yeah. It's a good question. For now, I think it makes sense, especially due to volume and stuff. It makes most sense to do that on Facebook primarily, because you can target a substantial amount of users through Facebook, and that's where we do most of our UA buying at the moment. We're still in soft launch, so it's still early days, but because you can't go too granular, obviously, or you should at a certain point when you have volume and you have a significant portion of your users that are highly valuable to you, where you're willing to pay whatever it takes, and then it's worth it to do it. But you need to have scale before you have core groups that you really need, like you need to, as part of your business model, to bring back into the game. Most of them, if you just use 2-3 networks, you're capable, like if your hit rate is going to be 70%, or that's a guesstimate, that you'll be able to at least reach through those channels. So yeah, don't go too granular too early, but once you get scaled, then it starts making sense also having a dedicated person actually focusing on this part with it and working directly with the networks on it. But and with this information, if basically if you're in your CRM, you know where they came from, and that's like a high likelihood that that's where you can reach them again. So even if it's just a manual process of someone taking their IDFA and saying, here, and like literally just copy pasting it into their platform.